Hello everyone. Tonight, I'll be narrating 3 new disturbing stories that I found off of Reddit. One from the Let's Not Meet subreddit, another from Creepy Encounters, and one from my own subreddit. If you wish to post any good stories on my subreddit, it would be much appreciated. After you have listened to these stories, let me know what you think of them in the comments below. But without further ado, let's dive straight into their experiences.
These other stories.
I was 23 when I started working full-time at everyone's favorite supermarket. I had struggled through over 3 years of college before deciding to get a full-time job, and I worked a trial full-time job for 6 months before becoming a greeter a year before it was changed to something more serious. I look younger than I am, and people have asked if I was still in high school or if I had a boyfriend, and I was ignorant enough to be used to those questions under a work environment. I also have anxiety, so I worried about customer service more than my own comfort zone most of the time in that position. I soon started to keep work journals detailing what I saw on a daily basis or anything I found suspicious, which came in handy for me in my opinion. There was this older gentleman that needed to use an electric cart to get around in EFS that I helped from time to time since I normally watched the secondary doors. He introduced himself as Al, claimed to be in his 70s, and required the electric cart because of all the smoking he did since his younger years. Al normally would strike up long conversations about his life after he was done shopping, that he would stay at least another 5 or so minutes before leaving, including asking if I had a boyfriend and, at one time, making up scenarios of meeting a potential boyfriend. As stated before, I was used to hearing the boyfriend question so much that I stick with saying, I don't have a boyfriend and I'm not looking to find one anytime soon. Al took this as me lying to get out of the situation when I was telling the truth. I also overlooked a lot of what he said most of the time because it was normally loud when these conversations happened. He had a rasp in his voice, which was proof of the smoking information he told me, and I thought they were things that were the norm for his time. As a retail worker, I felt it would have been rude if I ignored him and it gave Al reason to think that I was his friend. I didn't start seeing red flags about his behavior until late November 2018 when he told me that I looked pretty and that he wouldn't imagine me naked. It made me uncomfortable, but I awkwardly thanked him for the compliment and went about his shopping before I documented it down. Red flag number 2 came a month later, the day after Christmas and sometime after my birthday. Earlier that day, I was talking to fellow greeter Tom, a male in his mid-50s, about when greeter Queenie would let us go on our breaks after a Mountain Dew spill when Al came in to do his shopping. And after he was done, and I was helping him transfer groceries to a pushcart, he said he saw me talking to Tom in a monotone sounding voice and left without going into conversation. It was enough to scare me. Red flag number 3 came not even a week into the new year. Al came back to do some shopping and tried to strike up a conversation with me after he was done, but noticed how I was trying to focus on my job more than him. This prompted him to ask if he made me uncomfortable, and I told Al I didn't want to be rude as I thought telling him would make him upset all the time. Al told me that he sees me as a friend and that whenever he comes in, he looks to see if I'm working because I'm the friendliest greeter compared to everyone else before he left. I could tell he wanted to put me at ease, but it did the opposite as I found I was right to be paranoid about him. I started to actively avoid Al if I ever saw him again and was alone at either door, acting like I was busy and having an assistant manager switch me and Queenie to different doors whenever the two of us worked alone in the morning. It worked for a month until greeter Nora came and gave Queenie her breaks when she wanted them. Come February, I'm gathering baskets when I spot Al at the register that sells tobacco and he says hi to me, but I ignored him and hurried away. I later asked one of my managers to use the restroom and hid in there until I couldn't hear him. Self-checkout host Story had noticed how uncomfortable I was, as Al recounted that he thought he might have insulted me because he asked if I had a boyfriend. He then told her everything he was saying to me and Dory understood why I was so uncomfortable. She later told me that Al was very vocal about me ignoring him until he left. I told 2 other co-workers as I was trying to catch up in my journaling as I had fallen behind it, and they told me to escalate the situation to the head of loss prevention, Rebecca. I eventually did once I had 3 entries written down and marked as my evidence, and told Rebecca what I had been doing to avoid Al. I was afraid to tell anyone in management without any evidence as I worried I'd be brushed off as an anxious worker, but Rebecca took me seriously and said I was doing the right thing by avoiding him. Since my journaling included times and dates, I was able to give Rebecca the time frame Al was most commonly coming into shop at the time, sometime between 10 a.m. to 2 p.m., closer to the end of the month, and mainly Sundays. With that in mind, I was told to keep an eye out whenever Al ever came back in and to point him out to her or her team, as his actions could lead to harassment of the customers as well. In March, I was surprised to see Al come in at a later time and act more professional around me, keeping things to hello and goodbye instead of trying to make a conversation. Even with a change of attitude, I still kept my guard up. Near the end of the month, around 6:50 at night, Al stated how nice the weather was and asked me if I could help him out to his car with his groceries so I could take the electric cart back inside. It's EFS's policy that the electric carts stay inside to avoid any damage to them unless if the customer physically can't get to the store without heavy assistance. So I politely said he had to use a push cart as the electric cart can't go outside and I'd get him one. Al was a bit insistent in taking the electric cart out and was halfway through the entryway, but I pushed the push cart close to the electric cart and politely insisted that the electric cart stay inside to avoid any damage from pebbles and dust that could get into the cart. Al relented at that reason, had his groceries put into the push cart and left. I was relieved that the situation wasn't escalated, so I had to help him, but I did take note of his car should Al get an idea to try and follow me home. That was also the only time he ever asked me to help him outside. I eventually told Nora that I didn't feel comfortable around Al, as she said that I wasn't the only young woman he had said these things to, as he said things like this to other female workers at other EFSs since Nora had transferred over from the West location in the city. A little over halfway into April, I switched over to cashiering and put together more information about Al's visits so I could try to avoid serving him by myself. Coming in around the time food stamps was replenished and within the 7 to 10 days at the end of the month, mainly on Sundays and Fridays, and during the 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. and 5 p.m. to 7 p.m. time frames. Luckily enough, I didn't see Al after the switch. Even more coincidentally, at the start of May, I found an online article by the local newspaper with a picture who looked to be Al in my Twitter timeline. I didn't want to get my assumptions up and had Nora look at the picture 2 days later. To my shock, Nora confirmed it was Al. Reading the article revealed that Al had quote-unquote spilled gravy on his laptop and took it into Popular Electronics to get the files recovered when the IT people found what appeared to be pictures of children during the recovery and called the police. Al admitted to saving the photos and was able to describe what he saved and was arrested. The article also revealed that Al wasn't his real name, that he was really in his mid-50s. It was from a nearby city in Iowa, which explained why he mainly came in on weekends. I told everyone that knew the story that they were equally shocked, but also relieved. I did research on his state laws and on the charges against Al a few days after his scheduled court appearance and found that he was guaranteed at least 2 to 10 years in prison. In October, I decided to do more research as it had been months and found more articles confirming that Al copped a plea deal for 2 years and over $600 in fines for each count against him. It was sentenced in September. I had switched to another position on the sales floor by the time I found out about the sentencing. It's been over 2 years since then, and I have my old co-workers and Rebecca to thank for giving me the fact and confidence that I do have the option to tell a customer no if I feel something isn't right. But I can't help but think about how badly things could have gotten if I helped him out to his car and if he had other intentions in mind. It should also be noted that any electric cart policies are put in place not only to maintain the functionality of the cart, but to also protect the employees from injury or other harm at any store electric carts are provided, and I was lucky to enforce this policy when I did. I started working part-time at a local gas station convenience store over the summer of 2016 to earn some extra money while attending college. When I was hired, I was informed that female employees were never scheduled to work overnight shifts, for obvious safety reasons, which I was relieved to hear. I wasn't so much worried about my safety, but I was concerned about getting enough sleep before classes. It wasn't long before I found myself dreading the days I had to work though, as the job turned out to be much more difficult than I anticipated. We were always short-staffed, which forced us to constantly multitask between running cash registers, preparing food, keeping eyes on pumps, cleaning, stocking, etc. To make matters worse, the 2 women who managed the place were awful in every way, and I frequently found myself biting my tongue and talking myself out of quitting. I was especially on edge when they cut our 15-minute breaks down to 10 minutes, as I never seemed to have enough time to use the restroom and smoke a cigarette fast enough. But it wasn't until several annoying encounters with a regular, I'll call him James, that I finally started to break. James was younger than me, maybe late teens or early 20s, and he thought he owned the place. Perhaps being the grandson of one of the managers gave him a sense of entitlement to screw with people there. The first time I met James, He approached the counter to purchase some chewing tobacco. As I was ringing him up, I asked to see his ID and he told me who he was related to, but I politely asked again to see his ID because I was new. Another employee overheard our conversation and assured me he was old enough, so I went ahead and rang him up. Staring at me intently the whole time, he looked down at my name tag and said, "Mindy, that's a pretty name." I thanked him for the compliment and gave him his dip, but he continued talking to me and asking several personal questions. He wanted to know where I live, what my last name was, or whether or not I had a boyfriend, etc. Meanwhile, a long line had formed behind him, and not trying to be rude, I said something like, "Sorry, there's a line behind you," and I casually motioned for the next customer to move up, but James didn't leave. He simply stepped to the side and continued talking to me and watching me as I rang each customer up. It was immediately uncomfortable and unsettling for me, but I did my best to pretend like I wasn't bothered, even when his persistence escalated and another coworker told him to leave me alone. James soon began to make more appearances after that, the second time being with his girlfriend and another male friend by his side. Yes, he had a girlfriend, and I was very confused when he started flirting with me again, this time right in front of her, but oddly enough, she didn't say a word. So I brushed it off and played along, assuming he's just the goof that my coworkers said he was. But when he sat in a booth with his sidekicks at the back of the store, I could still feel his eyes burning a hole right through me. Over time, I grew more suspicious of James, as I would witness him do and say countless things to hurt others. I knew that he was annoying, and I learned to brush it off as a all-in-good fun type of humor like everyone else did. But when I caught him making fun of another coworker to her face, all I could feel was anger towards him. I removed her from the situation by taking her place at the register, as I could tell she was very hurt and embarrassed by his comments, and by doing so, it was apparent to James that I didn't approve. He would continue to cruelly harass this poor girl, and even some of the customers who came in, but trying to make him stop was like scolding a child. I didn't lash out at him though, I just began to ignore him. James then started playing these head games with me while I was working. He would take soda and candy, walk outside without paying for it, and then come back in the store and say that I forgot to ring him up, loud enough for everyone to hear. One night, he even filled up his gas tank and took off without paying for it, before returning to say he forgot to pay. He knew he'd always get away with it, because Granny was the manager. By this point, it wouldn't have surprised me if he was really stealing gas and food from the store. There was something very dark and strange lurking behind his goofball facade, and I avoided him like the plague, though it was nearly impossible to do at times. Then one day, while I was working alone with another coworker, we were very busy with tasks as usual, when, lo and behold, James walked in by himself. I muttered under my breath, "Pain in the butt," and I walked straight back into the freezer to finish what I was working on earlier, and then he followed me, inside the freezer. I didn't know he was there until he walked right up behind me and asked why I didn't greet him anymore. Startled, I jumped and quickly turned around, grabbing my chest and asking him what was he doing back there. He laughed as I told him I was busy and reminded him that only employees could be in this area. He ignored everything I said and instead proceeded to ask me personal questions, just like he did the first day I met him. "You never told me where you live," he said, and "I'm curious about you. I just want to know. Tell me where you live." He was moving closer and closer towards me, literally backing me to the corner of the freezer. "Are you afraid of me, Mindy?" he asked. I tried to push past him, telling him to move, but he kept stepping in front of me to block my way out. "Not until you answer me," he said. I started calling out for my coworker, who showed up and gave him crap for being in the freezer. I was finally able to push past James, and I made my way to the front counter, where I looked at the clock and saw that it was time for me to go home. I gathered my things and punched out as quickly as I could, but James followed me out to the parking lot. I swiftly got into my car, but James had managed to grab the top of my car before I was able to shut it. "Come on, just let me see your ID," he persisted. I repeatedly told him no, before I found myself practically begging for him to let go of my door so I could go home. Then he grinned at me and said, "Don't make me follow you, Mindy." Chills ran down my spine. Knowing how bold of a person he was, and considering the fact that he literally just cornered me in the freezer only minutes ago, I highly expected him to follow through. Threatened by visions of what my drive home might soon look like, I became angry. I looked at him dead on before shouting, "Let go of my door and stay away from me." I then grabbed the door handle and ripped the door shut as hard as I could. He tried yanking on the door handle from the outside to open it, but luckily I locked the doors in time. He then continued to knock on my window, asking to see my ID, but I started my car and backed away from him. I turned the wheels and hightailed it out of there, while he just stood and watched me speed off. I was never so glad to finally get away from him, but I was paranoid the whole way home, thinking that he could possibly catch up to me on the road even though I never saw his vehicle behind me. I would end up quitting the job after this, and I didn't care that my hiring manager was pissed about it. I had enough of everything, and dealing with James was the last straw. I didn't bother explaining anything to my manager, because it was apparent to me that James was probably never held accountable for anything he did ever wrong in his life, and he likely never would be. I never saw him again after that, and I hope I never do either. James was honestly borderline psychotic. This was told to me by an old friend and coworker, whose neighbor has made his life what could be equated to a real nightmare. I don't believe what he said at first. Turns out, this neighbor is known to others in the area for being off the deep end, and I've had several people tell me that personally since this happened. My boss even mentioned it, and she's practically a second mother to me and has nothing to gain from lying about it. I can't give the exact location, but I can tell you this takes place in mid-Michigan. This all started around 7 years ago, and has gotten progressively worse, especially in the past few months. My neighbor has always been a bit odd, but it seems he went off the deep end when he found his wife with another man. He sort of snapped. It began with us finding our dogs dead, having been shot by someone. It wasn't that tough of a guess as to who did it, because houses out here are few and far between. This happened a few times, but being that we lived where we did and the way things were around here, no one called the cops. This is due in part by the guy being unstable, there being no hard evidence to link him to it, and not to mention if the police didn't find anything, he wouldn't know who called them. So, skip forward to a few months ago, when another dog had gone missing. She gets out fairly frequently, I'll mention later. I ended up walking out to the woods around our house, alone being that my friend didn't want to go. I had been out for a bit when I heard off in the distance. After looking a little bit, I saw him. After what he has done in the past, I decided I need to get at least some sort of evidence. So I pulled out my phone to start recording. I tried to get a little closer, then hid behind a tree, so that only the phone was out to record. He was out under a group of pine trees, digging a hole, a big one. I shouted once just to see what he would do. Yeah, not the greatest idea. A normal person would look around, right? Look at their surroundings to figure out where the noise came from. Not this guy. He jumps out of the hole and grabs a gun and starts waving it around. I took this as my cue, and while he was looking the other way, got the heck out of there. After that, I couldn't stop thinking what he could be digging for back there. No matter what I came up with, I can't seem to come with a logical reason as to why he was doing that. Though, to be fair, since when is anything he is doing logical? A few nights later, my dog had gotten out again. We have them on an invisible fence, but one of the collars was acting up. Anyway, this happened at about 3 a.m. Of course, the dog wasn't in our yard, but at least I had a friend that had time to search with me, so out we went. We were walking through the woods and realized that the neighbor's garage door was open and the lights were on. Curious, we quietly made our way over, with me taking my phone out after what I saw last time. As we approached the garage, I handed the phone off to my friend. I went around back to look for my dog, while my friend stayed up front, but then noticed him standing at his workbench at the back of the garage. It's one of those things that you kind of look on in disbelief, or have to do a double take to actually realize what you're seeing. It's 3 in the morning, and this guy is standing in his garage sharpening what looked like spears. After a bit he stopped, and I headed into the house and opened the door leading out next to the garage. My friend moved to the side of the garage and watched. The light on the side of the house was on, and he was sitting nearby. The guy comes out and picks up an extremely heavy black bag and puts it into his wheelbarrow. Now to put this into perspective, he's a big dude, and according to his brother is able to bench around 500 pounds. So whatever is in this bag isn't normal trash. He stands there for a moment, grabs his shovel and puts it with his bag, and starts off into the darkness towards the woods, and the direction of the location I saw him digging in before. After this, I decide to head over a couple of nights later, this time making it to his garage, in time to find him dragging another bag out. This time though, things got even weirder. He drags it out, then drops down and starts punching it, then proceeds to grab a golf club and starts whacking at it harder. He does this a few times, then throws the club behind him, bouncing it off his boating and almost hitting me, and puts it in his wheelbarrow, picks up his shovel, giving it one last good hit, and then starts towards off the woods again. This brings us to a couple weeks ago. My dog had gone missing for a few days, and fearing the worst, I decided to make a bold move. Or stupid one, whatever you think. After seeing that he left to go hunting, I made my way to his house and went in. What I thought I would find, I'm not sure of, but I thought it ought to be worth a look, seeing as I could find my dog anywhere else around and he's obviously been up to something. I made my way in and started looking around, making my way from the basement up, but it was when I was on the second floor that my worst fears came true. I heard a sound that made my heart nearly jump out of my chest. The door downstairs opened. He was back. In a panic, I ducked into the closet of the first room I came across, which, of course, his bedroom. I closed the door and crouched down, waiting for him to leave again, but he instead made his way upstairs into the room and sat down, his outfit and mask still on, leaning his gun against his desk. I sat there, not sure of what to do, how long I would be there, if he would find me, or what he would do if he did. I waited for what felt like forever, but ended up actually being a couple minutes, till there was a sound from downstairs. I couldn't believe my luck. He jumped up and grabbed his rifle and ran downstairs, and I took this opportunity to run down, following the stairs all the way to the basement and out while he was occupied. I don't think I've ever run that fast in my whole life. I left the back door and sprinted off into the woods and made my way back to my house. So, the good news is I'm obviously alive, and the noise that I heard when he grabbed his gun and ran downstairs it was the cops, waiting within a warrant for his arrest. I'm still trying to figure out what this psycho did, but haven't got an answer from his brother or the cops. I left a tip hunting in the woods, but as far as I know, no one has ever set foot out there. Currently, he is still sitting in the jail, and I hope it stays that for a while. First update. Me and a friend had gone out into the woods when we knew he wasn't home to see if we could find anything what he was digging. What we ended up finding were a ring of those spears stuck in the ground with large holes in front of them, some of which had been filled in. Of course, they were the traditional size for a grave, including being about 6 foot deep. I don't know what this dude is doing, but I'm going to keep an eye out. Second update. While crazy neighbor's in jail, I ended up doing some work over summer for his brother, who was slightly less crazy but still a little off. He wanted me to dig a hole for him in the corner of the basement, supposedly for drainage. Thought oddly enough, he asked me to make it big enough for someone to be able to get down there. The one thing I noticed while down there was the smell. That of something rotting meat in particular. That smell you get from a bloated deer on the side of the road on a sunny day. Why would I do it for him? Well, simple answer is I've dealt with sketchy people before, and he didn't seem near as bad as his brother, and I really needed the money. Either way, I got the job done and got the heck out of there. Final update. He's out of jail and back home. This will be the final update for now, or at least until weird stuff starts happening again. All this information was collected back in 2015-2016, and it's been a long while since this all went down. Maybe there was something sinister, maybe he's just another tweaker, which is quite common out here. It's been a couple years since I've talked to the person the story came from, but could possibly reach out for further insight. Alright, so that's it. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please consider liking this video and subscribing to my channel. I have memberships now enabled on my channel. If you become a member for only $5 a month, you get priority reply to comments, access to members only chat rooms, and access to add me on Steam to play PC games with me. I also live stream, so stay tuned for those. But as always,
Have a nice day.